Děkuji, Karel. Dobrý den. Dear colleagues, thank you very much for your invitation and for your interest in my lecture on the topic effective teaching and learning in higher education. Let me start with a brief story about instruction. The story played out a few decades ago during summer 1917 at Lake Tahoe in Northern California in the United States. The University of Southern California School of Medicine conducted its annual continuing education conference. The teacher training conference was attended by psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers and educational administrators. The first invited speaker was Dr. Myron Fox, introduced to the audience as a student of John von Neumann and an authority on the application of mathematics to human behavior. Dr. Fox presented his lecture titled Mathematical Game Theory and its Application to Physician Education in a highly expressive, entertaining and humorous style. After the talk, the participants filled out a teacher evaluation questionnaire providing yes-no responses about the speaker's performance. The evaluation of Dr. Fox was overwhelmingly positive. 100% had answered in the questionnaire that Dr. Fox had stimulated their thinking, and 90% that he presented material in a well-organized form, and also 90% that he put his material across in an interesting way. The story has a twist though. The speaker introduced as Dr. Fox wasn't actually a researcher or scholar. He was a paid actor named Michael Fox, known among other roles as vet Dr. Benson in the American television detective series Columbo with Peter Falk. His mandate in the context of this scientific experiment was to give a lecture that did not make any sense. So he actually gave a meaningless talk, presenting his lecture with an excessive use of double talk, neologisms, contradicting statements. At the same time, Dr. Fox adopted a lively demeanor and humorous speaking style, interacting warmly with the audience. In essence, the research group around John Weir found that students can be seduced by the wit, charisma and expressiveness of a lecturer into believing that they have learned, although the lecture is void of any content or substance. This so-called Dr. Fox effect was subsequently reproduced in scientific replication studies using the original videotape of the lecture. Insofar as, from students' point of view, presentation style was found to be more influential than content in providing learner satisfaction. Nevertheless, subsequent studies also found that even students who reported that Dr. Fox was a highly effective speaker did not think that they had learned anything from the lecture if asked specifically about whether they felt they had learned something from the lecture. Also a classic story, the Dr. Fox experiment is worth remembering, due to its relevance when it comes to effective teaching and learning in higher education. The experiment shows that instructor enthusiasm and expressiveness on the one hand, and measures of student satisfaction based on course evaluations on the other hand, do not suffice in order to assess whether teaching is in fact effective when it comes to actual student learning. Student ratings are frequently used as a measure of teaching effectiveness in higher education. However, students' subjective evaluations, even if they turn out positive and students are satisfied, don't tell us much about if and what they actually learned. In another attempt to get a grasp on effective teaching in higher education and what it means, Leslie Lane, a professor at Lynchburg College in Virginia, asked a sample group of professors and students to define effective teaching. Based on the open-ended responses, Lane generated a list of 30 possible definitions for effective teaching. A broad pool of respondents was then asked to select the top 4 of those definition options. On the left side of the slide you can see the top definitions identified by faculty members with the percentage of the respondents who selected the item as one of our 4 best definitions in brackets. The instructor loves the subject, knows the subject material well, 50% vote, is organized, well prepared for class, 44%, uses a variety of teaching methods and formats, 41%, and the fourth one, cares about the success of students, 31%. This now is the list of the top 4 definitions identified by students. The instructor keeps students interested for the whole class period, makes the class enjoyable, 45% of students, loves the subject, knows the subject matter well, 34%, interacts with students, takes a hands-on approach to the subject, 29%, and uses a variety of teaching methods or formats, 24%. As you can see, there are some similarities but also differences in these definitions. Lane notes that only 6% of the faculty respondents listed the keep students interested for the whole period in their collection of best definitions. Only 13% of students listed the is organized, well prepared for class definition, for instance. Overall, the student list focuses much more on how teachers relate to them, while the faculty list focuses more on what they think teachers need to do in relation to course content. Lane's study suggests that students evidently base their approval much more on social and emotional factors, such as professors' interactions with students, than on the professor's skill with presenting the subject materials. In contrast to social factors, the notion of approval for faculty members is more associated with job performance. Am I teaching the materials I'm expected to teach efficiently? Am I creating an atmosphere of learning in the classroom? Am I inspiring and motivating students to learn? The implications of these differences are important because if faculty implement changes to increase their effectiveness, they may be opting to improve in ways that are also important to students. Beyond that, however, there is still the issue of how these definitions of effective teaching relate to student learning. Is there actually a relationship between these teaching behaviors and student learning? This brings us to the leading question of my presentation. What is effective higher education teaching, or what good, meaning effective, instructors don't do or do? This question is relevant because the quality of teaching affects the learning processes and outcomes of our students, and teaching quality can be influenced and improved. Furthermore, an increasing number of higher education didactic centers are in charge of improving the teaching quality and the teaching competencies of instructors, not only professors but also lecturers and other teaching staff in higher education. These centers focus mainly on counseling and training, mind you, often without conducting any scientific research and devoid of professorships. Finally, an increasing advice literature on good teaching in higher education cannot hide the fact that measures and professional development in higher education all too often lack evidence-based research. Teaching tips, practice tips, qualitative studies about what the best teachers do, or crash courses in higher education didactics are only few examples of such advice literature, with ideas, recipes, and practices aiming at improving teaching and learning in higher education. The German Association for Educational and Academic Staff Development in Higher Education aims to coordinate efforts and knowledge on quality higher education and learning, and to strengthen the research orientation when it comes to higher education teaching and learning. The association counts about 400 members and has charity status. Its members are institutions or persons that work and or do research in the field of academic development or that are interested in developing the quality of higher education in German-speaking countries. The core activities of the association are an annual conference, financing the publication of at least one book per year, organizing a mailing list and a newsletter, workshops, providing support to special interest groups and networks, and awarding the Johannes Wild Prize for the best doctorate and the best master's thesis in order to foster research. So if you are interested in learning more about what is going on in higher education, teaching and learning in German-speaking countries, including academic staff development, this is one valuable source with lots of information and materials I would like to point out. In the following, I will provide a definition of good, respective, effective teaching. I will briefly introduce the main idea behind current models of the provision and uptake of learning opportunities that are recently adopted in the context of higher education. After that, I will present and discuss the elected empirical research findings on effective higher education teaching. I will focus on instructor behaviors that support student learning of relevance to all teaching staff in higher education. Finally, I will summarize some of the key ideas on effective teaching and conclude with a holistic outlook regarding the design of effective learning opportunities in higher education institutions. Effective means successful in producing an intended result, according to the Oxford Dictionary. When it comes to higher education teaching, one can ask, effective with regard to who or what? Faculty teaching with the instructors using a variety of methods and media and presenting new material in an enthusiastic and expressive manner, for example, or with regard to student learning. Effective teaching means that instructors design and enact learning environments that support deeper student learning, meaning student meaning-making or student sense-making. The students and their learning processes and outcomes are at the center. Rather complex models of provision and uptake of learning opportunities applied to higher education suggest that students' actual learning outcomes do not only depend on the quality of the education offered, but also on the extent to which students leverage the learning opportunities provided by the instructor. These models differentiate between three levels: provision of learning opportunities, uptake of these opportunities, and learning outcomes or results. The central idea is that learning outcomes as subject-based and transversal competences are not the direct result of how instructors design the learning environment by virtue of their teaching competences. The students are responsible for the active uptake of those opportunities. This means that effective teaching also depends on various learner prerequisites, such as approaches to learning, values, expectations, motivation, and prior knowledge. Consequently, and we have to keep that in mind when talking about effective teaching, the learning processes and outcomes are influenced by what instructors and students bring to the table. Learning is the result of constructive interactions between teachers and students and influenced by the teachers' and students' cognitive, motivational, and social characteristics. What do we know about what instructors can do to provide students with opportunities for deeper learning? What constitutes effective teaching? Michael Schneider and Francis Preckel from the University of Trier in Germany provide a systematic state-of-the-art literature review of meta-analysis on effective teaching. They contribute to our knowledge about effective teaching in that they identify central instruction and student variables associated with achievement. This approach is also in line with what the prominent Australian professor of education, John Hattie, calls know thy impact. Instructors need to seek evidence of their impact on students and seek comparisons between different ways of influencing student learning. In their research synthesis, Schneider and Preckel included 38 meta-analyses investigating over 3,000 research studies published in English with almost 2 million students. The meta-analysis had been published between 1980 and 2014. The authors investigated 105 correlates of achievement and thus variables that influence learning. The authors heuristically assigned the 105 variables included in the review to 11 categories that corresponded to central areas of educational and psychological research. 6 of these 11 categories were found to be instruction related. The remaining 5 were found to be learner related. Criteria for academic achievement were standardized, achievement tests, ad hoc constructed tests, teacher-given grades, and other indicators such as degrees received. Effect sizes were measured using Cohen's d, and the authors differentiated between no effect, small, medium, and large effect. The table shows that of the 105 variables, at least 87% have a small effect on achievement, meaning most of the research variables are associated with academic achievement. A comparison between the two main categories, instructor and student variables, shows that 69%, so about 2/3, of the instruction variables show at least medium or large effects, while 40% of the student variables show at least medium or large effects. Based on this first glimpse, one can conclude that there is a close relation between academic achievement and instruction variables. Before we look at concrete teaching behaviors that have the largest effects on achievement, I would like to briefly look into the student variables. The table shows that when it comes to student variables, the category intelligence and prior achievement, for example prior grades, has the largest effects, followed by strategies such as frequency of class attendance. Very important. The 3 remaining learner-related categories concern motivation, personality, and context variable, as you can see. So, how are high-performing students characterized? This is just a summarizing list. The list summarizes features of high-performing students, so high intelligence and prior achievement, high self-efficacy belief, goal-oriented usage of self-regulated strategies such as effort regulation and time management, self-motivation through grade codes, and continuous class attendance are especially effective when it comes to student achievement. So students and their prior knowledge play, and motivation of course play a role. Back to the instruction variables. Let's look at instruction. This table shows 6 holistic categories that were subsumed under the main category instruction variables. As you can see, social interaction has, compared to the other 5 categories, the most correlates in the medium and large effect range, namely 100%. This influential category is followed by the categories stimulating meaningful learning with 78%, for example using conceptually demanding meaningful and relevant learning tasks, and assessment with 75% medium and large effects on achievement. The table also shows that measures taken to assess learning progress are nearly as effective as presentation of content, with 66%. The last 2 categories, technology, for instance, blended learning formats, and extracurricular training, for example training in study skills, are shown to be less influential. I would like to exemplarily look at the most powerful category among the instruction variables, the social interaction between the instructor and the students and between the students. Effective social interaction is provided by instructors who encourage students to ask questions as well as content-rich discussions in the classroom. The dialogue that is initiated in this context provides learning opportunities because students verbalize what they know, exchange arguments and reasoned ideas, and grapple with different perspectives. Thereby, effective instructors listen attentively, remain in the background and let the students do the talking. Use revoicing techniques and make sure that different voices are being heard. They are available and helpful to students and pose open-ended questions instead of closed questions in order to encourage student thinking and support the social construction of knowledge in the classroom. In order to be effective, instructors also allow for small group learning so that students can work together on challenging problems and learn from each other. Lastly, effective instructors show concern and respect for students and are friendly and thus create a fostering learning climate in the classroom. The results of all of the 6 instruction categories show that effective teaching mainly depends on the microstructure of the learning environment, that is, on what instructors do in their courses, not on didactic showmasters, but not as didactic showmasters, but as subject matter experts and cognitive scaffolds as well as activators of interaction and discourse. The following list of what good teaching means or how it looks like summarizes the most effective teaching behaviors. Among the 3 categories: social interaction, stimulating meaningful learning and presentation. All listed teaching behaviors show large effects on student achievement. Good, meaning effective instructors invest time and effort in the preparation and organization of their courses, in that they plan in advance learning outcomes of the course, cognitively activating learning tasks and attractive discussions, as well as assessment questions for students to test for themselves whether they have reached an intended outcome, meaning whether they understand the content more deeply or can apply what they have learned. They present content such as abstract ideas and theories clearly and use examples to get across certain difficult points. This includes clearly structured content, usage of key terms on presentation slides and graphs, for instance. They stimulate interest in the course and its subject matter, in that they make connections to students' interests, pre-existing knowledge and experiences. Good instructors encourage students to ask questions, initiate meaningful discussions, and they are available and helpful. Good instructors possess verbal skills, that is, they speak clearly at appropriate volume and pace and use proper modulation, for example. They show enthusiasm for their subject and or for teaching, in that they motivate students to grapple with subject matter and share their own experiences as well as anecdotes, for example. They clearly define course objectives, requirements and student responsibilities in the course. And they pose open-ended instead of closed questions, for example, why questions that aim at student experiences, reasoning, or students' own ideas and wonderings. Both classroom research, mainly conducted in schools, as well as the cited secondary analysis conducted by Schneider and Reckel, with the later focusing on higher education, show repeatedly not primarily the teaching method or social form or media used in the classroom, but how selected methods or media are implemented and whether effective teacher behaviors are enacted is crucial for student learning. However, there is another variable that is even more important than what the instructors do. The teaching conceptions of or teacher beliefs that instructors hold, meaning how they think about their role. It is their mind frames or ways of thinking about teaching and learning that are most critical. In the course of their professional development, instructors generate specific beliefs on the subject matter they teach and on the nature of student learning. In higher education, there has been considerable interest in conceptions of teaching because they influence instructors' decisions and behaviors in the classroom. Research on conceptions of teaching suggests two basic conceptions. Teacher-focused or content-oriented conceptions referring to the transmission of knowledge from expert teacher to novice learner, as is the case in traditional lectures. Student-focused or learning-oriented conceptions referring to conceptual changes in students' understanding of the world, focusing on what students do in order to understand and what the instructor does to facilitate student learning. Researchers also submit that becoming an effective teacher involves developmental stages following the growth of teacher competence. What the students are. Learning is primarily a result of individual differences between students regarding ability, attitude, motivation, and study skills. This is the initial mindset of a new teacher. What teachers do, the second phase. Learning is primarily the result of appropriate teaching, meaning the effective transmission of information and understanding of important concepts of a certain discipline to students. And the third stage, what students do. Learning is the result of students' learning-focused activities with a focus on what the student does and on whether student activities that lead to appropriate learning are supported by the instructor. The first two understandings rely on a deficit model, blaming either the student or the teacher for the outcome, and many academics seem to follow traditional transmission theories of teaching similar to the first two understandings. The third conception provides a systemic view that takes into account what it means to understand something at the desired levels and what kinds of teaching and learning activities are required to reach certain understandings. At the beginning of my presentation, I outlined a conception of effective teaching that focuses on teachers designing learning environments that support deeper student learning. This understanding is rather aligned with the third conception. Against this background, there is another central insight that came out of the secondary analysis on effective teaching in higher education. University teachers need to think of themselves as evaluators with regard to both students' learning processes and outcomes and their own teaching. Assessment provides learners as well as teachers with feedback about past progress and their needs for future development. Thus, know thy impact also means making teaching and learning visible, so that the effects of teaching behaviors become noticeable. The following three instruction variables show the largest effect on student achievement when it comes to assessing students. Formative evaluation refers to a teacher's sensitivity to and concern with class level and student progress in terms of student learning during the course of the semester. According to Hattie, feedback is most powerful when teachers gather information on student learning to actually use this information to enhance their teaching. The quality and frequency of feedback, meaning feedback that is continuous and timely, as well as informative and constructive, with clues and questions stimulating independent thought and reflection on part of the students. Finally, a high quality of examinations. For example, tasks that are designed on a high cognitive level, like analyzing or evaluating, so that students do not only have to reproduce what they have heard in a lecture, but have to create something on their own or have to evaluate some cases, for example. The presented empirical data indicate that central effects on students' academic achievement can be found in the microstructure of teaching, in the details of how the learning environment is designed and enacted, that is, the concrete teacher behaviors. Compared to questions surrounding teaching methods and media usage, questions surrounding presentation style and learning content play an important role in the context of effective teaching. Content knowledge, enthusiasm, and expressiveness are necessary but not sufficient in order to ensure academic achievement. Social interaction between instructor and students between students, that is, meaningful dialogue and discussions, as well as formative, cognitively activating learning support conducive to student learning are central influencing factors on achievement. The teaching conceptions that instructors in higher education hold are also crucial since they influence instructors' decisions and behaviors in the classroom. So far, effective teaching was focused on the teacher. I would like to close with a holistic outlook on the provision of learning opportunities involving the entire higher education institution. And maybe this overview and outlook gives us a platform for further discussion afterwards. So it starts at the micro level. This is what I talked about, that the teacher is essential, and especially the teacher behaviors in the classroom and how the course is designed. And of course, there are measures of personal development that can improve teacher competences. For example, the courses that didactic centers offer at universities, or also a new approach like the scholarship of teaching and learning, where the instructors research their own teaching and try to reflect on their teaching and improve it, and even publish what they found. Then the next level would be the macro level. Here it is important that the entire higher education institution has a concept of good teaching. So, for example, what does Charles University or the Faculty of Education mean by good teaching? So what are the key principles? And these have to be agreed on, so as kind of something to strive for. Never reach it probably, but strive for at least. And so this is the task of the entire institution, and there are measures of organizational development. For example, some universities award teaching prizes. I don't know if there is one at Charles University, but in the German-speaking countries we have these prizes. Also, they come with some prize money even. Or, for example, some funding for innovative teaching projects, or coaching and counseling for professors at university. And even some have professorships at these didactic centers that conduct research, like the University of Dortmund or the University of Hamburg in Germany. I know they have real professorships that do research in this area. So, in order to really increase the appreciation for teaching in higher education, because so far research is much more important. And we have a third level, which is the meso level. These are the study programs in the different disciplines or the subjects you can study as a student, for example. And so a faculty has to agree on certain study programs. What are our objectives? What kind of teaching approach do we apply? What is our assessment task, and so forth. So this is the task of the experts in the different disciplines, and they have to decide how they design and enact their study programs. And of course, there are also different measures to help these faculties to develop their programs further. Didactic centers, again, can maybe be helpful in this regard. But also networks and exchange with other faculties at other universities, for example. To conclude my presentation, I want to stress again that the most important and influential variable in higher education teaching and learning, aside from the student, of course, is the teacher. So if we want to improve the quality of higher education, we should start with the teacher and then design everything else around what goes on in the classroom and what research tells us about effective teaching behaviors. Thank you very much.